Hey guys, gals, athletes, how are you? If you're racing Ironman this weekend, I hope and wish you well. One of the things that I don't think a lot of people were expecting was it's gonna be hot this weekend. And I always tell my athletes that call me and they freak out that it's gonna be hot, I remind them, hey, you signed up for an outdoor summer sport. Sometimes it's gonna be warm, right? So if you wanna control the environment, maybe consider curling or something like that, right? But I don't want to kind of give tips that is going to take anybody off their race plans or things that they've trained to do. I feel like at this point, obviously the hay should be in the barn and everybody's probably ready to race, and I'm excited to see everybody do really well this weekend. But there's one thing, having raced twice, several times, that I can tell you that I've picked up from racing in the heat, and they're pretty general things that I think, like all the tips I give, I try to give pretty acute tips that people can adjust right away. Imagine, I think a lot of people can relate to this, right? You've all been training through the summer or maybe even a couple years, and you've essentially been saving for retirement, right? So now it's retirement day and you have a set amount of assets that you've saved up. Now it's up to you to decide how you want to spend those assets. So the good news about this is having a good day, assuming that you've all done what you're supposed to do, and I'm sure you all have, is still totally within your capacity to have, right? So if we really step back and think about this in very general terms, I always tell my athletes, listen, when you stand on the start line, you should be feeling pretty good, right? And no matter what else you think, or no matter what else you do, or whatever measurements or monitors you're going to do, I always encourage them to do the 10-minute test. So you feel really good at the beginning. You should be able to continuously ask yourself every 10 minutes, once that 10 minutes is done, do I still feel really good? Do I still feel good relative to where I'm at and what I have left? If the answer is ever, I don't know, you've only been messing it up for 10 minutes. There's still time to regroup. So the goal is to just get through to every single 10 minutes to still feel pretty good. So whatever you have to do that, make sure you do it. It's so funny, I always tell athletes, and I have to remind them, if something's wrong, as silly as it sounds, stop and fix it. I had an athlete once that had terrible blisters on their feet, and they had to walk for several miles, and I asked them, when did you notice that this was a problem? And they said, I'm about mile 4 or 5, but I didn't want to stop and adjust my shoes because I didn't want to slow down. So it sounds crazy, but every single time, a lot of these things are avoidable if we just stop and make an adjustment early. So that's going to kind of lead me to my first tip, right? When it's hot, you have to be mentally flexible to adjust your goal. And I completely understand why so many people train for a time, but now is not the time, no pun intended, to really be concentrated on that time. Hopefully, no matter what it is you've been monitoring, whether it's your heart rate or power or pace or some combination of that, you've been taking inventory all summer or all season about how those zones that you've come up with makes you feel when you're doing the race. Whatever you feel on race day needs to be what dictates kind of what happens. So if you're feeling terrible, but your numbers are telling you that you should be going harder, you can't push through that stuff. That's at least my recommendation. So you have to respect that feeling, and you want to kind of keep that feeling in check. You want to think about also, how can you get through the entire course, like we've talked about on the swim, with pretty much the same type of energy, right? So rethink exactly what it is you want to do, dial it back, and remember, take inventory of how hard you want to go perceived effort-wise, and really let that be your guide. Okay, so other tips that I would have. One thing to think about on the bike when you're out there, no matter what your zones say or what your power says or whatever, you want to think about doing and executing your ride so that when you finish that ride, you could continue riding. You don't want to, obviously, you want to get off your bike because your butt sore and your neck sore and all that other stuff, but you want to have the energy to continue that ride for another 3 or 4 hours. Because if you don't have the energy in your mind to continue that ride, there's no way that you could actually run, right? So you want to try to continue that effort throughout the day. So you want to think about that. Okay. More tips. I think Ironman Chattanooga is a lineup swim, if I'm not mistaken. I've been in races where you get to wear wetsuits even though it's hot, and I've made the mistake of putting on my wetsuit too early. So think about, you want to keep that core temperature as cool as you can for as long as you can. So even if you want to pull it up to your waist, don't zip it up early. Wait kind of until the last minute. So really think about that. That's one tip, even pre-swim. Bottles on the bike, right? So freeze your bottles. That's a suggestion that I usually give people. And you also want to freeze them sideways so that if for some reason they're not completely unfrozen when you go to take your drink, if you freeze them vertically, it's going to be hard for water to pass through that nipple cut, that top. So if you do it on the side, it'll create a faster channel for things to kind of go through. So that's another tip that I would always say. Okay, so there's a lot of things out there that go to making you feel cool. There's a difference between feeling hot and being hot. So the arm coolers and the water on the head and all that other stuff, it's really good to do, and I'm not saying don't do it, but you want to think about the difference that you need to do between feeling and being hot. So a good analogy would think about if you have a pot of boiling water and you rubbed an ice cube on the outside of it, okay, that might for a fraction of a second make a difference, but you have to reduce the heat, right? So the biggest thing that you can do in the heat is make sure that you keep your intensity in check, which goes back to that rate of perceived exertion. You have to keep your core temperature as low as you can so that you can continue to absorb food and be able to put energy into actually going forward. So if your core temperature gets too high, nothing else is going to work, right? It doesn't matter what you're doing. So really, that's where you have to be mentally flexible to adjust and really think about that. Your intensity. I can't state that enough. If you want to do things to help you feel cool, one of the things that I always do is as soon as I get to the aid station, it usually goes like water, Gatorade, gel, water, Gatorade, gel on the bike. You know, they'll repeat it 2 times, maybe sometimes even 3. As soon as I get to the first one, I take a bottle, I put it in my mouth, and I just hold it there. I immediately try to grab another bottle, and I'm spraying it all over me. And if I can throw that one and get another one, I do that a few more times, because remember, I still have the one in my mouth. And so then with that one, I go ahead and I drink as much as I can, and then whatever I don't use of that, I spray it all over. Halfway through the bike or some portion in the bike, you're probably going to start going through your nutrition bottle, so you should start having some empty cages on your frame. Don't be afraid to even grab another one and just put it on your frame, not even for drinking, but if you can cool yourself off. I try to remind myself how many times I've gone out for a long run or a long ride, and I come home and I maybe put a cold hose on me, and I know that I just used the analogy of the boiling hot water, but it's still, it feels really good. So those are little tricks that I have found as well. Okay, adjust early. That's another one. So if you're going to make an adjustment and you plan to make that adjustment, make sure to make that adjustment early. So I usually say, if you can remain in control of what's going on, that's going to leave you in control longer. If you wait until things start getting dictated to you, then that's never good. So an example of that is if you plan on walking at all, right? I know a big thing that a lot of people do will say, all right, I'm going to start walking, but I'm going to wait until things kind of go sideways, and then I'll start my walk-run program. So I'm going to run as far as I can. The problem with that is, I understand the theory, but the problem with that is that when you start walking because you have to, you're probably going to walk 2 or 3 minutes per mile at least slower. So trust me, I know, I've been there. The last few years I struggled with heel issues, and as most of you know, I had surgery, and I can tell you that when it got to the point too painful to run and I would have to start walking, I was getting passed by a lot of people walking 5 to 6 minutes per mile faster than me, which sounds crazy, but if you're walking and you're walking because you're dying, you're going to be walking 22, 25-minute miles. And if you walk with a purpose early, you can get that down to around 15 to 18-minute miles, which, if you think about it, if you do that for several miles, you know, collectively, that makes a big difference. The other thing that I'll say is leave all judgments at home. So the biggest thing that I've done in the heat to make big mistakes is I start judging my result based on my preconceived notion of what's going to happen and where I should be. So make sure that you absolutely do not judge your race until it's all over, and you absolutely leave that on the side, because you might get really surprised. I remember one year at Racine, for example, I think it was in 05, I think we had 106 degrees, and I think I was running like basically a 2-hour half marathon, and I thought I was going to be terrible. In the winter, ended up running a 132. So that would be my biggest other thing. The other last tip, or one of the last tips, would be make sure that you stay mentally engaged. As soon as you become mentally detached from what your immediate goal is, then you're going to have more and more struggle. So if you can find little ways to motivate yourself to get through the next however many minutes or the next distance or whatever, that could be a huge thing to just keep you mentally engaged. So that's my tips. Oh, last one, consider putting an extra cage. So I know that we're all into the aerodynamics and the weight and all that other stuff, but on really hot days, I always tell people, do not sacrifice economy for weight. So make sure that if you can carry an extra bottle cage, maybe it might be a good idea to do that. And good luck. If you guys have any tips, never hesitate to reach out and ask. You can get a hold of us at superflycoaching.com. And we're here to help. We do this because we like it, and I'm really excited. Go kick some butt, and I really want to see everybody have a great race, and I'll see you guys next time. Bye.